The date is December 8th, 1944. The location: a frozen, claustrophobic stretch of timber known as the Hürtgen Forest. To the High Command in Washington and Berlin, this was a strategic stalemate, a meat grinder that was consuming divisions whole. But at 0400 hours, for Sergeant William Edward Jones, the geopolitical grand strategy of the Second World War had narrowed down to the cold steel of a Springfield 03A4 sniper rifle and the rhythmic breathing required to keep his glass optics from fogging. The temperature hovered agonizingly above freezing, a damp, bone-chilling mist clinging to the pines. Through the crosshairs, Jones watched the pre-dawn shadows of German soldiers. They moved with the casual confidence of men who believed they were invisible in the dark, unaware that they were being hunted by a ghost from the American frontier. What separated this engagement from the thousands of other sniper actions across the European theater was not the caliber of the bullet or the sophistication of the optics. It was an absurdity that defied military logic. A raw potato, crudely duct taped to the end of the rifle barrel.
He actually believes they can
To a
cross the river
conventional
there.
military mind, it looked like a prank.
Based on this intelligence report,
To
The
Jones,
schematic clearly
it was a
illustrates the
subversive
gas
technological
expanding
bypass,
rapidly and
an
dispersing
improvised
outward from the
suppressor
center
designed
mass
to
of the
mask
potato.
the signature muzzle flash and the distinctive crack of a high-velocity round. This potato trick was about to rewrite the tactical manual of the Hürtgen Forest. Over the next 48 hours, this single Idaho farm boy would utilize this improvised silence to eliminate 43 German soldiers. The kills would come with such terrifying stealth that German commanders, gripped by a growing hysteria, would report to their superiors that they were facing an entire elite platoon of snipers rather than a single 24-year-old from the rural Northwest. To understand the impact of Jones's actions, one must understand the strategic nightmare of the Hürtgen. Historians now view this campaign as one of the U.S. Army's greatest tactical failures of the war. A 50-square-mile green hell, where American advantages in armor and air power were neutralized by the density of the forest and the rigidity of the Siegfried Line. In this environment, the traditional big battalion approach was failing. The American military needed a different kind of asset, the independent, asymmetrical thinker. Jones was the personification of that need. His innovation didn't come from a laboratory in Los Alamos or a factory in Detroit. It was born 6,000 miles away in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, a town of 3,700, where the Great Depression hadn't just been a headline, but a daily struggle for caloric survival. Born on March 14, 1920, William Jones was a product of the American hard times. While the geopolitical tensions of the 1930s were simmering in Europe, Jones was navigating the silver mines and rugged timberlands of Idaho. His father, Thomas, a man weathered by the mines and a failing farm, taught William a singular, brutal economic reality. Ammunition was a luxury the family could not afford to waste.
A stark
In the
reminder
Jones
of the
household,
conflict,
every bullet was a
silhouetted
transaction.
against the coming dawn.
If a bullet didn't bring home a deer or an elk, the family went hungry. This wasn't sport hunting. It was subsistence harvesting under extreme economic pressure. By age 12, William was a veteran of the woods, a silent shadow who understood that the loudest sound in a quiet forest was the report of a rifle. It was during these desperate winters that Thomas Jones passed down a piece of folklore that would later baffle the German Wehrmacht. He had learned it from an old-timer named Dutch Henderson, a veteran who claimed to have used a similar method during the trench warfare of the Great War. The theory was rooted in basic, albeit unconventional, physics. The dense, cellular structure of a potato acted as an improvised baffle. When a bullet passed through, the moisture and mass of the vegetable absorbed a significant portion of the expanding gases and the accompanying sound wave. It wouldn't make the rifle silent. The Hollywood silencer is a myth, but it transformed the sharp, directional crack into a dull, muffled thud that sounded more like a falling branch or a distant door slamming. By the age of 14, William was already an expert in the botanical ballistics of the potato. He discovered through trial and error that the Russet variety, with its specific starch density, provided the best results compared to the softer red potatoes. He learned the precise art of hollowing out the center, leaving enough wall thickness to dampen the sound, but not so much that it would catch the bullet and throw off the trajectory. He realized that moisture content was the critical variable. A dry potato was useless. These were the lessons of a boy trying to take multiple deer from a single herd without scaring them off. He was optimizing his harvesting efficiency in the woods of Idaho, never dreaming that this frontier improvisation would one day be deployed against the professional soldiers of a fascist empire. When Pearl Harbor thrust the United States into a global conflict, the U.S. Army scrambled to find men who could operate outside the rigid confines of standard infantry doctrine. Jones enlisted on January 3, 1942. At the recruitment center in Spokane, his background as a logger and hunter caught the eye of officers looking for candidates for the newly expanded sniper program. The Army was looking for a specific psychological profile: men comfortable with solitude, capable of independent judgment, and possessing a deep, intuitive understanding of fieldcraft. Jones scored a near-perfect 238 out of 240 on his first range session at Fort Lewis. His instructors noted his uncanny ability to read the wind and the terrain, but they missed the most important weapon in his arsenal: the unconventional mind of an Idaho farm boy who knew that in war, as in hunting, the most effective tool is often the one you make yourself. The Army's elite sniper school at Camp Perry, Ohio, was designed to turn marksmen into surgical instruments of the state. Here, William Jones mastered the unertl scope and the complex ballistics of the .30-06 round. But while his peers studied the official manuals, Jones was mentally cross-referencing military doctrine with the survivalist wisdom of the Idaho backcountry. During a seminar on urban infiltration, an instructor asked how one might neutralize multiple sentries at a high-value command post without triggering an immediate alarm. The official answer involved coordinated timing or the rare temperamental suppressors of the era, devices like the Maxim silencer, which were almost never issued to frontline infantry. Jones's hand went up. His suggestion, shooting through a potato, was met with a roar of laughter from the class and a dismissive failed mark on his exercise sheet. The military-industrial complex of 1944 had no room for peasant logic. To the instructors, Jones was a gifted shooter with a backward, rustic sense of humor. They didn't realize that in the coming months, the rigidity of their doctrine would be the very thing that allowed Jones to operate undetected behind enemy lines. Jones shipped out in June 1943 with the 4th Infantry Division, eventually landing at Utah Beach on D-Day. By the time he reached the Hürtgen Forest in December 1944, he was a seasoned veteran with 37 confirmed kills. But the Hürtgen was a different beast entirely. From a geopolitical and strategic standpoint, the battle was a disaster of attrition. While the Allied High Command was focused on the Rhine and the heart of Germany, the Hürtgen had become a forgotten slaughterhouse. The German defense, anchored by the 275th and 89th Infantry Divisions, utilized the active defense doctrine, interlocking machine gun fire and pre-registered artillery sectors that turned every clearing into a killing zone. For the American GIs, progress wasn't measured in miles, but in the number of bodies left in the frozen mud. the 4th Infantry Division alone had suffered over 5,000 casualties in weeks of fruitless grinding. It was here, in this atmosphere of terminal desperation, that Jones decided to bypass the Army's supply chain and return to his roots. On the evening of December 7th, Jones did something that would have earned him a court-martial in a more disciplined environment. He requisitioned a sack of russet potatoes from the division mess hall. When his squad mates mocked him, asking if he planned to win the war with starch, Jones remained silent. He knew what the officers didn't. The Hürtgen was a sound trap. The dense canopy and the humidity of the freezing rain created an acoustic environment where the crack-bang of a standard rifle could be pinpointed by German sound-ranging teams within seconds. If he wanted to survive more than one shot, he had to change the acoustic signature of his weapon. He spent the night meticulously hollowing out the centers of 6 large potatoes, wrapping them in damp cloth to prevent them from freezing, a technical detail he'd learned back in Idaho. A frozen potato would shatter like glass. A fresh one would act as an organic heat sink. At 0300 hours on December 8th, Jones and a 12-man reconnaissance patrol moved toward Hill 319. Their objective was to identify the German bunkers that were holding up the entire regiment's advance. By 0430, they reached an overlook. In the valley below, the German 275th was conducting a shift change. To the Germans, this was a safe rear echelon area. They were smoking, talking, and moving with a lack of light discipline that spoke of overconfidence. Jones found a hide behind a fallen hemlock, took out his combat knife, and taped the first potato to the muzzle of his Springfield. To an outside observer, it looked like a desperate improvised measure. In reality, it was a sophisticated, low-tech application of wet suppression. Modern ballistics experts note that moisture inside a suppressor significantly cools the expanding propellant gases, reducing their volume and the resulting noise. A potato is essentially a 90% water-based organic baffle. Jones acquired his first target, a sentry standing guard outside a command bunker, roughly 230 yards away. He squeezed the trigger. The recoil was standard, but the acoustic output was revolutionary. Instead of a thunderous report that would have alerted every German within a mile, there was only a dull, heavy thump, like a snow-laden branch snapping in the distance. The German sentry collapsed instantly. His comrades, standing only 20 yards away, didn't even look up. They assumed he had slipped on the black ice. Jones worked the bolt with practiced fluidly. The potato held. He fired again. A second soldier, moving to assist the first, dropped in mid-stride. This was the beginning of a 12-minute massacre that would later be studied by military psychologists. Because there was no identifiable crack of a rifle, the German survival instinct failed to kick in. They didn't dive for cover or return fire toward Jones's position. Instead, they fell into a state of cognitive dissonance. As men continued to drop silently, the survivors began to panic, but not in a tactical way. Some thought they were under a localized gas attack. Others believed their comrades were suffering from some horrific, sudden-onset medical trauma. By the time Jones had used up his first 3 potatoes, 17 German soldiers lay dead in the snow. Each shot had been fired into a vacuum of silence. Jones was essentially harvesting the enemy, utilizing a technique designed for deer to dismantle a professional military unit. The psychological impact of this invisible, silent death cannot be overstated. In the world of 1944, a sniper was a known threat, but a sniper you couldn't hear was a supernatural one. As dawn began to break over the Hürtgen, The German positions on Hill 319 were in a state of total structural collapse. The officers had lost control of their men, who were now refusing to leave their bunkers, terrified of the ghost guns that killed without a sound. Lieutenant Richardson, the patrol leader, watched through his binoculars in stunned silence. He had seen the carnage of Normandy, but he had never seen a single man paralyze an entire company with a vegetable. He realized then that the mission had changed. They weren't just scouts anymore. They were the vanguard of a new, terrifying form of psychological warfare. As Jones reached for his fourth potato, the potato trick was no longer a joke. It was the most effective weapon in the American arsenal. By December 9, 1944, the legend of the potato sniper had permeated the ranks of the 4th Infantry Division with the viral speed of a modern news cycle. In the grim, mud-caked foxholes of the Hürtgen, rumors were the only currency that mattered, and the story of Sergeant Jones and his silenced Springfield was being traded for cigarettes and chocolate. To the average GI, it sounded like a tall tale, a bit of frontier mythology meant to boost morale. But to the intelligence officers at division headquarters, the reports coming back from Hill 319 were backed by a chilling empirical reality. A German defensive line that had held for weeks had disintegrated in less than 2 hours, leaving behind dozens of dead with no evidence of a conventional firefight. Major General Raymond Barton, a commander grappling with the agonizing mathematics of attrition, realized that Jones hadn't just found a trick. He had discovered a way to exploit a fundamental flaw in German counter-sniper doctrine. General Barton personally summoned Jones for a debriefing, a rare occurrence for a sergeant in the middle of a major offensive, in a dimly lit command tent, surrounded by maps of the Siegfried Line. Jones demonstrated the botanical suppressor for a room of skeptical officers. He explained the physics with the calm detachment of a man describing a farm tool. He noted that the potato worked as a heat sink and a gas baffle, but he was also honest about the tactical constraints. At ranges beyond 300 yards, the sonic crack of the .30-06 bullet, the miniature sonic boom created as the round breaks the sound barrier, would still be audible. However, at the close, claustrophobic ranges of the Hürtgen Forest, where visibility was often less than 50 yards, the muzzle blast was the primary giveaway. By eliminating that blast, the sniper became directionless. Barton, seeing the potential for a low-cost, high-impact asymmetric advantage, didn't just authorize the technique. He ordered Jones to train an elite cadre. Suddenly, the division's mess sergeants were issued a priority requisition order that would baffle military historians for decades. Deliver all available russet potatoes to the sniper sections, no questions asked. The strategic pivot occurred on December 10th, targeting Hill 347. This wasn't just another ridge. It was a vital German observation post that directed devastating artillery fire onto American supply lines. If the potato trick was a localized success on Hill 319, Hill 347 would be its industrial application. Jones led a team of 6 marksmen, all of whom had spent the previous 24 hours mastering the delicate art of potato hollowing. They moved into position at 0300 hours, establishing a perimeter of silent death 300 yards from the German bunker. As the first light of dawn filtered through the frozen pines, the massacre began. It was a symphony of muffled thuds. Every time a German soldier stepped out to clear snow or adjust a radio antenna, they were met by an invisible scythe. The German reaction was a case study in psychological collapse. Because the shots were suppressed and coming from multiple directions, the survivors couldn't fix a point of origin. They weren't just being shot. They were being deleted from existence by an enemy they couldn't hear or see. By noon, the sniper team had fired 112 rounds, resulting in 87 confirmed casualties. Jones personally accounted for 31 of them. His efficiency was terrifying. He could swap a scorched, degraded potato for a fresh one in under 10 seconds, a reload speed that modern tactical shooters would envy. The observation post was blinded, and for the first time in months, American infantry were able to move through the valley without being shredded by pre-registered German 88mm fire. However, the most fascinating aspect of this engagement wasn't the body count, but the failure of German intelligence, Abwehr, to grasp the reality of the situation. Intercepted radio traffic from the 275th Division revealed a growing hysteria. German commanders were frantically requesting technical intelligence on American ghost gun technology. They were convinced the Americans had deployed a new, chemically suppressed silent rifle or perhaps a localized vacuum pressure weapon. When German recovery teams found scorched fragments of potato near the bodies of their fallen comrades, they dismissed them as kitchen scraps. Their internal bias, a belief in their own technological superiority, blinded them. They couldn't conceive that the primitive Americans were using groceries to dismantle the pride of the Wehrmacht. This was a classic geopolitical blind spot. The Germans were looking for a high-tech solution to a problem that was being solved with low-tech ingenuity. As December progressed, the potato trick hit its zenith, but it also met its most formidable opponent, the European winter. When the temperature plummeted well below freezing, the physics of the potato changed. A frozen russet didn't act as a baffle. It acted as an obstruction, shattering like a ceramic plate when struck by a bullet, which risked damaging the rifle's crown and destroying accuracy. Jones attempted to innovate, keeping spare potatoes inside his wool shirt against his skin to maintain their moisture and temperature. He even experimented with pre-warming them over small, shielded Dakota fire pits. But the logistics of warm vegetable management in a combat zone were becoming unsustainable. Furthermore, the Germans were finally adapting. They began using reconnaissance by fire, spraying entire tree lines with MG-42 machine gun fire at the slightest suspicion, realizing that while they couldn't hear the sniper, they could still suppress the areas where a sniper might hide. The era of total silent impunity was closing, but the damage was already done. Jones had pushed his personal kill count to 93, and the psychological shadow of the ghost snipers would haunt German infantry until the final collapse of the Siegfried Line. The technology of silence is usually the domain of the elite, the experimental, and the expensive. Yet, by January 1945, the 4th Infantry Division was no longer the sole proprietor of the potato suppressor. As word of William Jones's success filtered through the Allied command structure, he was pulled from the front lines not to rest, but to serve as an unconventional instructor for the 1st, 9th, and 29th Infantry Divisions. For a brief window in the winter of 1945, dozens of American snipers were scouring mess halls for russets before heading into the tree line. However, the military quickly discovered a harsh reality of asymmetric warfare. You can replicate a tool, but you cannot easily replicate the man who mastered it. Most snipers lacked Jones's intuitive grasp of vegetable ballistics. They would use too much tape, obstructing the barrel's harmonics, or fail to hollow the potato with the surgical precision required to avoid a catastrophic deflection. More importantly, the element of surprise, the most potent weapon in the sniper's arsenal, was beginning to evaporate. The German Wehrmacht, known for its rigid tactical discipline, was finally piecing together the puzzle of the ghost snipers. While they never quite believed that the Americans were using groceries to win the war, they began to treat every unexplained casualty as a confirmed sniper threat. Interrogation reports from captured German officers during this period reveal a fascinating geopolitical irony. The Germans, who prided themselves on the engineering of the Sturmgewehr 44 and the V-2 rocket, remained convinced that the Americans had developed a revolutionary new chemical propellant that burned without sound or flash. They were looking for a high-tech explanation for a low-tech problem. This intellectual arrogance was a tactical windfall for the Allies. Because the Germans were looking for advanced American technology, they completely ignored the possibility of simple frontier improvisation. Even when scorched potato starch was found on the muzzles of captured American rifles, German technical analysts dismissed it as battlefield debris or evidence of poor soldier hygiene. They were victims of their own sophistication, unable to conceive that an Idaho farm boy had bypassed their entire industrial military complex with a pocket knife and a russet. As the war entered its final bloody act through January and February 1945, William Jones continued to operate with a lethal, quiet efficiency. By the time of the German surrender in May, his total confirmed kill count had reached 137, placing him among the most successful American snipers in history. Of those kills, 73 were attributed to shots fired through an improvised potato suppressor. This statistic is more than just a number. It represents a fundamental shift in the effectiveness of the individual soldier. In the industrial-scale slaughter of World War II, where artillery caused 70% of all casualties, Jones's surgical precision provided a psychological counterweight. He wasn't just killing soldiers. He was paralyzing units, diverting resources, and forcing the German command to spend precious man-hours developing countermeasures against a threat they didn't fully understand. After the guns fell silent, Jones was interviewed by Army historians documenting combat innovations. The transcripts, now housed in the Army Heritage Center, reveal a man who was deeply uncomfortable with the hero narrative. When asked about his psychological state while eliminating 61 men in a single month using the potato trick, Jones's response was chillingly pragmatic. He explained that he didn't view the Germans as humans in that moment, but as targets that needed to be harvested to protect the herd. It was the philosophy of the Idaho woods applied to the survival of Western democracy. The morality wasn't in the act of killing, but in the necessity of the outcome. This emotional detachment, the ability to remain fundamentally himself while performing a grim, necessary task, is what allowed him to return to civilian life in October 1945 without the shell shock that broke so many others. Jones returned to Coeur d'Alene not as a decorated warrior, but as a man who wanted to forget. He married his childhood sweetheart, Margaret, and purchased a ranch where he spent the rest of his life raising cattle and guiding hunting trips. He never sought the spotlight. He rarely wore his medals, including the Silver Star he earned for the Hürtgen Forest actions. The citation for that medal mentioned his innovative sniper techniques and exceptional courage under fire, but it conspicuously omitted the word potato. Even in 1945, the Army High Command found the reality of Jones's success a bit too unprofessional for official history. To the Pentagon, it was an embarrassment that their million-dollar weapons programs had been outperformed by a piece of produce. Yet, the legacy of the potato trick survived in the shadows of military development. Post-war analysis of Jones's performance directly influenced the development of the M3 suppressor and later specialized quiet kill weapons used in Korea and Vietnam. The core principle Jones demonstrated, that sound reduction doesn't need to be perfect to be effective, became a cornerstone of modern special operations doctrine. It was the realization that enough suppression to cause confusion is often more valuable than total silence. In 1962, a documentary crew finally tracked Jones down. He agreed to a meeting on the condition that they wouldn't film him. He demonstrated the potato trick one last time for the researchers, proving that even after decades, his hands still possessed the muscle memory of the Hürtgen. He told them that tools aren't about glory, they are about function. "The potato did its job," he said. "It kept my boys alive. That's the only record that matters." William Jones died in 2003, a quiet rancher who had once used the humblest of vegetables to change the course of a silent war.